Hello and welcome to Get Wet with Saray Johnson. This will be part of my Division 3 and some themes that we're going to be exploring in the first few episodes will be care and keeping of insertive sex toys, both biological and non-biological. Here defined as dildos, butt plugs, fingers, fists, and tongues. Sex after sexual violence, sex work in the LGBT community, the feminist sex wars and their impact on sexual practice, etc., etc. But today we'll be talking about topping and bottoming. Even though the show is in its early stages of productions at this moment, the planned regular segments will be cheap sex toys in unexpected places, where we'll be going around to places like CVS, the supermarket, and hardware stores to find sex toys in places that you don't normally look and talk about care and keeping of these things that you're either making or just finding around. What's your flavor, which is going to be a time for us all to talk about sexual practices that we actually enjoy. For instance, what's your favorite sexual position for digital penetration? And then we have the climax, which will be a space reserved for questions about orgasm, female ejaculation, and sexual response. And Name That Dyke, where we will give you quotes from famous dykes, and you get to guess which ones they're from and who they are. It might be me one day. Or you don't know. By being here, you all volunteer to be a segment on Name That Dyke. So an article by Moskowitz, Rutger, and Roloff that uses methods by looking at a bunch of gay men's personals. Amongst gay men, the categories of top, bottom, and versatile reflect sex roles during anal intercourse primarily. But that study found that 75% of the men surveyed had accurate self-labels of their topping and bottoming almost 100% of the time. So the labels that people were imposing on themselves were actually correlating to sexual practices, which is not necessarily the same as like gender identity or like sexual orientation, which is why I found the topic so interesting to begin with. So also one of their hypotheses was that the label was derived from a more frequent enactment of one behavior over another. And that bottoms were the most likely to be mutable within that category, even more mutable than those who consider themselves switches or sexually versatile, which also kind of counteracts understandings of tops as particularly masculine or bottoms as particularly feminine, or as this is like an issue that's inextricably tied to gender. Although it is also often seen as a microcosm of larger power dynamics in a relationship. But these interviewers also ran into the issue of how acts that do not involve genital penetration fit into a conventional understanding of topping and bottoming. So I was going to open that up to questions or comments and concerns and the frightened faces of the audiences. But I know there's someone here that's brave enough to take that bait.
Wait, what was it again?
About how I was wondering how you guys felt about topping and bottoming in the context of something that's not necessarily directly penetrative, such as receiving fellatio or giving oral sex to a female assigned partner. For instance, like where does that even fit in on the spectrum of topping and bottoming? And does that like discount notions of our understandings of ourselves as like tops or bottoms? Like for instance, like I identify as a bottom, not a power bottom, but definitely a pillow queen. And so like if I'm going to fuck someone, like that would, like with a strap on or with my fingers, like that necessarily would be a deviation from like what other people understood to be a bottoming activity. So I was just wondering, not necessarily with as much information as I gave, that's whatever. But yeah, anybody? Nobody? Yay.
Just a thought that's coming into my head, just thinking about like double-ended dildos and the use of that in, a couple that's both female-bodied, and how, like that's not necessarily like an activity that's just like bottoming and topping because like there's penetrative pleasure on both ends. Just a thought.
No, I definitely agree with that statement. Double-ended dildos, like the Nexus, and other ones that are a little more precariously shaped, like snakes with two dick ends at the end of them, in the context of like harnessing or oral sex, can like definitely be a more complicated issue than maybe a simple notion of having one top and one bottom. No? Okay, moving on to power bottoming. So power bottoming, for me, like disrupts the like power bottoming or the power bottom interrupts the idea of the masculinity as dominance, and masculinity as being, or like dominance in a sexual relationship as being purely penetrative, and the idea of like fucking or topping someone with an orifice.
I really like the phrase power bottom. I've never heard it before, but I feel like it adds, it just brings an interesting, dynamic to bottoming that like is not necessarily attached to bottoming. Which, like, I don't know, not to like say that there's something not there, but it recognizes a power in it. That's neat.
Definitely. Well, for those of us who have heard the term power bottoming, like what is like the difference for any of us between bottoming and power bottoming? Because I know for me, like to be a bottom is to understand yourself to be a receptive partner, and to be a power bottom is to like fuck someone with an orifice, is to be like in a topping role as a receptive partner. Mm-hmm. So like that's what the difference between bottoming and power bottoming is to me.
It's also weird to think about like if someone being a power bottom then like takes away the power of the top person, or if like the person who tops like them becomes like not so dominant, or if it stays having like that dominant like power dynamic too. I just think that that's like interesting to think about.
Yeah, I also think that there can be so much fluidity like within one sexual encounter, like a particular like time frame of a sexual encounter, and like having there be people like switching within that like sex act versus like across time. And I think that I don't know what I think about that, but just that exists in different ways.
I also think that power bottoming throws the entire act of bottoming into like really clear relief, because for me, the bottom is in charge during insertive sex too, or with the idea that the bottom runs the fuck, mostly because there are often higher risks to an orifice than to whatever you're inserting into it, during both vaginal intercourse and anal intercourse, and oral sex too. For cuts and tears, if you get fucked too hard and then you have like problems, you can develop problems with your cervix, or like be a very like painful experience for things that are very sensitive. So I think that like power bottoming is something, or the concept reminds me that bottoms have to take charge in, or at least not give up their power in a situation in which they are the receptive partner.